Session, give me a second. All right, okay. So, first of all, before anything, I would like to welcome all of you, and I would like to wish all of you a wonderful um, International Coaching Week. I think there are so many sessions are happening around the world at the moment during this very short period of time. And I sincerely thank all of you for showing up to this session. It says a lot about you. It says that you're curious about this emerging area. I strongly believe when it comes to trauma informed coaching, this is the future of coaching. And at the moment, it is slowly starting to evolve and grow. So your presence means that you are aware of emerging areas of coaching and you think about your client deeply. That's how I understand why you are showing up while there are so many sessions happening around the world. So thank you so very much for your curiosity. Thank you for being here. I deeply appreciate all of you. And as a way of celebrating International Coaching Week, I would like to share with you some, I hope, very valuable insights that would deepen your presence, that would deepen your inquiry, that would deepen your understanding about your clients as you walk away from this session. I promise you that. And let's begin. I think you definitely read my introduction in the
Yeah.
in the post, in the ICW website. So I'm not necessarily going deep into sharing about myself, and you will get to know me as we continue on. I would like to very briefly mention Ignite Global is an fully ICF accredited coach education provider, and that is a very small part of what Ignite does. As you may have noticed, I'm also a registered eclectic psychotherapist. I bring different elements. Eclectic means bringing strength from different practices, combining them in working with clients and patients. Therefore, I use coaching as one of my tools. Beyond that, uh, my therapeutic approach is very much aligned with coaching. The reason is, as you are aware, there are many different types of schools of therapy, and I very strongly focus on humanistic therapy. And as you know, humanistic therapy truly means allowing the client to find their own healing, just like in coaching, allowing the client to find the wisdom within themselves. So, coaching is something that I very deeply appreciate, and my community of professional coaches, I very warmly co-create together, sharing this knowledge because I believe that we are here for a purpose. When I talk to colleagues, professional coaches, I have never heard anyone saying, I became a professional coach because I needed a job, or I was just looking, I clicked on something by mistake, and then I became a professional coach. I've never heard that. Have you? What I have heard is many of you saying that I'm deeply passionate about bringing true impact, transformation to the clients I work with, starting from yourself to your loved ones and then to your clientele. And that's what I have heard about, and I believe you resonate with me. I do notice that many of you from my network, our professional network, are joining in. So, colleagues, those who are joining the Trauma Informed lecture series, today's session is the first session that I did. As you know, that I will always talk about various things from different perspectives, but I would like to quickly create a little bit of a disclaimer. If you are in my network, if you're joining the complimentary trauma informed coaching competency framework focused um, lecture series I do, this is the very first lecture, very much aligned in that same direction. All right, so I would like to welcome those new colleagues to Ignite Global and also to get to know me. Welcome. Wonderful to have you in this space. So, without further ado, let's begin. Now, I would like to frame this entire session from a little bit of a new and different perspective. I would like to invite us to think about how trauma informs love. Perhaps when you think about trauma, very often we tend to think about it as if it's something challenging, it's something negative, it's something painful. It's absolutely true. I completely agree with you. At the same time, I am not necessarily coming forward to share with you that trauma is negative, trauma is challenging and difficult. Rather, I invite you as professional coaches. I believe many of you are professional coaches and we appreciate different perspectives. Therefore, I would like to invite you to look at trauma from a different perspective today and to think about how trauma informs love. So, as we begin this session, I would like to invite you to think about your very first initial intention, why you wanted to become a professional coach. I believe that you did not think that, oh, I would only like to focus on clients' present movement, and then I want to move forward with the client into the future. You didn't necessarily potentially understand this when you wanted to become a professional coach. You simply thought, I see the value of coaching. I would like to enable this powerful transformation, impact, growth in my clients when you began that journey. And then you came into coaching profession and then you started your coach specific education. During that process, you learned that as a professional coach, you need to focus on clients here and now, just like I said, here and now to the future. And then you notice that immediately clients' past was not incorporated into coaching. It's very understandable because it requires a very specific set of skills, knowledge, way of being in order to incorporate clients' past. Now, even if you look at coaching, the definitions from the ICF perspective, you will notice that according to ICF, if the coach is operating in client past, primarily client's emotional past, from ICF perspective, ICF considers it as therapeutic mode. It's very understandable. So then also we say sometimes some of us, especially those coaches who work in more the personal, external coaches, those who work with individual clients, we tend to make claims like we sometimes say we do holistic coaching. We say we do integrative coaching. And we need to really ask ourselves, how holistic can coaching be if the focus of coaching is here and now to the future? If we are unable to incorporate clients' past strongly into the coaching process, how can we really claim that coaching is truly holistic? So this conversation today will open many doors for you to recognize what truly holistic means. Well, also just incorporating clients' past into the coaching process doesn't necessarily indicates that coaching is fully holistic. So the word holistic is a very complex word. And today you potentially would open a new door to understand and recognize what it truly means to incorporate different aspects to make your coaching holistic. So let's dive in. How trauma informs love. So as we do that, I would like to share with you that this lecture contains references to challenging experiences, adversities, trauma, and similar mental conditions. Therefore, please engage with caution. Especially if you're a highly sensitive person, there might be certain content that would be triggering. Therefore, please engage with caution. So continuing on, make a note. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. This is not necessarily an interactive session. Think about it as a lecture. I would like to share with you some insights around trauma-informed coaching, and I also look forward to sharing with you, which I believe is world's pioneering comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency framework today. And also, this link for the CCE, Continued Coaching Education certification, will be shared with you by my colleague Lux towards the end of this session. All right. So as we begin, as we discuss about trauma informs love, I would like us to look at this scenario. At once, it might look a little bit intriguing. or even a little bit humorous. Let's have a look. So, what happened to this cat? What is happening to this cat? Right? So you notice that the cat gets ejected from its place when it sees the cucumber. Right? It's a little bit distracting to keep playing, so I'm going to come back here. All right. So you notice, oh, let me just stop sharing for the moment. Yeah. So you notice that the cat gets ejected from its place when it sees the cucumber. And if you think of it, it's not just only this cat. Across cat species, regardless where they live, it happens to cats. For an example, in certain parts of North America, there are no cats. There are no snakes as such. They have not encountered a similar shape to a cucumber, like a reptile, like a snake. But even if they haven't seen a snake for many generations, they still get ejected from its place. And evolution, if you look at the evolutionary process, truly what is happening to the cat is that cat perceives the shape as the predator, in this case, a danger, and then cat gets automatically ejected from its place. That's really what's happening there. Although it looks humorous, there's a very important, deep purpose to what happens to the cat. So we need to begin this discussion actually many 100 years back in the jungles, in the forests, when there were wild cats, when they were walking around carefully, they were bitten by snakes. And some of those cats were able to somehow crawl into safety. It was excruciatingly painful, and they somehow survived. They got themselves survival. And as the cat was struggling, as the cat was going through that deep pain, something that governed cat's deeper intelligence beyond cat's conscious intelligence, cognitive intelligence, if not this thinking intelligence, feeling intelligence, a deeper intelligence within the cat did something quite magnificent, I would say. This deeper intelligence that is governing cat's body as cat is alive thought somehow it's extremely painful for the cat. Therefore, and also it threatens the survival of the cat. So if I could think for this governing intelligence, the higher intelligence that governed cat's body, consciousness, experience, must have thought, if we could store this information somewhere in the cat's body, when the cat has offsprings, if the cat's offsprings could receive this information that snakes can be very dangerous, they might be able to survive. Their survival their survival may be better than this cat. And then this intelligence also somehow knew in order for the cat to pass on this information to its offsprings, it required to store somewhere, this information to be stored somewhere that it can be passed on. And as many of you are aware, how the information is passed between generations is through genetics. We call this epigenetics. So the cat's genetics decided to absorb this information and save it and use it when it is necessary. And that's exactly what is happening in this situation. So when we look at this cat, what's really happening to the cat is cat's peripheral vision recognizes this shape similar to a snake, and before cats even think, right? Even before cat consciously thinks, it gets ejected. If not, this is an involuntary muscle reflex, where the cat gets ejected from its place to safety. Although it looks funny, although it could be a little bit dangerous for the cat if it hits something, you notice that it has a very deep purpose. Now, the experience itself, the traumatic experience itself, bitten or attacked by a snake was challenging. It was very difficult, excruciatingly painful. But a higher intelligence that governed cat's pain, cat's emotion, cat's thinking, plus the genetic um, memory decided to store this information. So when this happened, now because generations of cats have experienced this excruciating pain, they continue to get ejected from its place. There are involuntary muscle reflex that cats have developed in it is motor control. If you come to think of it, it's a response of trauma. When the trigger, which is the cucumber, in this case, the shape of the cucumber, is present to the cat, the cat gets ejected from its place. What it truly means is that although this response and this trigger remind them of the pain their ancestors went through, this higher intelligence hardwired that into cat's DNA because this intelligence wanted the cat's offsprings to survive, increase the survival. So if you notice, encoding of trauma, storing of trauma in our body, and when there's a trigger is present, when there's a response to it, it does not mean to hurt the cat. It does not mean to hurt the being. It means survival. So if you come to think of it, the highest intelligence that governs cat also governs us as human beings and other beings as well. So this higher intelligence that we possess within us do not mean to necessarily hurt us, hurt cats, and hurt other beings. What this intelligence truly means is to love, is to safeguard the upcoming offsprings. So there you are. Trauma informs love. True that it's painful, true that it is challenging. Nevertheless, trauma truly means love because it invites us into survival, not necessarily pain, although the response can be painful. Now let's look at, now I talk about cats, enough of cats. Let's look at a real world human experience now. Have you heard about the survivors' children, the Holocaust survivors' children, certain complications that they experience? Do you know that there's a specific gene in our body which we call FKBP5? This specific gene is responsible for once we are alert, once we are activated towards survival, if not when there's threat present in our outer world, we become alert. And this gene is responsible for determining how long we remain activated. If not, how long we remain in this alert state. In other words, how long we remain in experiencing the threat, giving us an opportunity to get ourselves to safety. So interestingly, when we look at the children of the Holocaust survivors who have not directly experienced Holocaust, have the tendency that they remain alert much longer than someone whose parents have not been exposed to Holocaust. So there you are. Trauma informs love. It is true that state of being activated, that state of feeling like that we are experiencing a threat, it requires us to get ourselves to safety, is not meant to hurt these children of Holocaust survivors. What's really happening is it gives us an opportunity, a longer opportunity, where we all can, these Holocaust survivors in this case, can get ourselves safety. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted. Can you please keep your microphones muted? Thank you. All right. So you are noticing that trauma truly informs love. It does not mean to hurt us. It means to safeguard us. If someone who wants to safeguard you, your mother wants to safeguard you, your partner wants to safeguard you, your grandmother, your great grandmother wants to safeguard you. So that intelligence runs through our generations to generation. So you're starting to recognize, I'm not just talking about this acute, challenging experience we had, the overwhelming experience we had, and the challenges that we experience afterwards. I'm talking about how even generationally, trauma truly means safety. Trauma truly means longer survival. Therefore, I invite you, if we ever experience trauma in a way that it is a bad thing, that it is a negative thing, that it is a challenging experience, that it is extremely painful, we understand that. But at the same time, we are only looking at the surface. As professional coaches, we invite our clients to go deeper, look at the deeper perspective. Therefore, as professional coaches, we invite ourselves to look at things from the deeper perspective. And that is why I am meeting you today to share this message with you. So let's move forward. How trauma informs love. So, as we talk about how trauma informs love, we start to recognize that trauma as human experience rather than something that reject, that's something that we neglect, something that we dissociate from, and we say trauma is bad, therefore we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to approach trauma. And I think that's happening a lot, especially in the coaching world. Some of us are comfortable working with clients' emotion, especially challenging, difficult, intense emotions. And some of us are not necessarily comfortable working with clients' deeper emotions. Perhaps it's because when we are in highly organizational context or when we are in highly societal context, somehow, unfortunately, we have come to believe that the strong emotions represent weakness, vulnerability represent weakness. But the truth is, the strong emotions inform love. Strong emotion is part of being human. Strong emotion leads us to survival. Strong emotion leads us towards safety and love. Therefore, we need to recognize trauma as human experience. And we, as professional coaches, in spaces of human transformation, reflective practice, enabling innate growth and healing, it's so important that we approach vulnerabilities, challenges, traumatic experiences, trauma responses, triggers as part of human experience. We need to go beyond the boardrooms. We need to go beyond societal conditioning. That is why I'm here. I invite all of you to reflect. You do not have to accept what I say. I invite you to continue your research. I invite you to continue to reflect and see what this means. And also beyond that, when we say that we are not working strongly with emotions, oh, I don't want to work with clients who have strong emotions. I don't want to talk about clients' emotions. I don't want to talk about trauma. When we deviate from that, we also must ask, why is that? Why? Within myself, why am I deviating from it? Why am I not comfortable with emotion? What is triggering me there? What does that really mean? Once we accept this as trauma as human experience, I believe it opens up new doors for yourself, for your loved ones, and also for your clients. And I want to tell you this very brief fairy tale I heard. I don't remember the names, but I can tell you that there used to be a king, and this king didn't have children for the longest time. My grandmom told me the story. And when this king and queen didn't have a child for the longest time, when they finally had a child, the evil witch showed up and cursed the child, cursed the, let's say, princess, cursed the princess, and said, when your child turns 18 years old, they will die uh, by beaten by a snake. And the king and the queen became very fearful. So what they did was they built a glass box, spacious glass box, and they placed their child, the princess, in this glass box because they now know that no snakes can crawl into the glass box. And when the princess turned 18 years old, the princess drew the figure of a snake on the glass. And unfortunately, that day, the glass broke and she got pricked by the glass and she died. If you're thinking, Fernando, what's the moral of the story? It tells us a deeper truth. It tells us that no one is invincible. No one is invincible. Perhaps right now you're thinking, I had an amazing childhood. I was cared for. I had all the resources when I grew up. My parents were loving and caring. I do not have trauma. And many of my clients say that. At the same time, however, even if you believe that you don't have any trauma, we can't escape the DNA that had been passed on. If you simply look back generations, we have been through slavery, we have been through wars, we are still going through wars. Somewhere down our generation line, someone was assaulted, someone fell off a tree, someone was unfortunately sexually assaulted. And when such atrocious events took place, the universal intelligence that is governing us, whatever you would like to call it, somehow encoded that information. So even if you might not have had any challenging childhood or adolescence, even as an adult, it doesn't necessarily mean that we do not have trauma as such. It is part of human experience. Simply think about along the line of the story of the princess. See how a human condition, human experience is when when a woman gives birth to a child. We know there's a very small percentage of women who do not experience pain when they give birth. Imagine the kind of painful, traumatic experience a woman goes through when they give birth to the child. And do you know that it is equally traumatic for the child? And imagine the father who is holding the hand of his wife, witnessing their baby being born, perhaps holding the hand, perhaps outside of the labor room, biting their teeth, the pain that they go through, the fear that they go through. So you're starting to recognize it doesn't necessarily mean a collision with vehicles or falling off a cliff, or bitten by a snake, assault are the things that actually traumatize us. Even the natural ways of being as human beings, beyond human beings, animals experience trauma whether we like it or not. It is part of human experience. It is part of informing love. Come to think of it, imagine if all of us lived in ecstasy, however that means, whatever that means. If you all could reach a specific ecstasy, like let's say a drug-induced ecstasy, all of us lived in ecstasy, would we know that we live in ecstasy? Because if only ecstasy existed, we wouldn't know what ecstasy means. In order for the ecstasy to exist, there needs to be atrocious pain. So we understand ecstasy. Now, that is a little extreme example. But think about yourself. If you feel currently a wonderful state of mind, emotion, you feel mentally, emotionally, physically very healthy. You're somewhat very close to that wonderful well-being that we all aspire to achieve. We would only appreciate such well-being, such peace of mind, contentment, if we knew what it is to experience pain, the other side of the story, the pain. So in order for us to experience pleasure in life, this mental, emotional well-being, physical well-being, it's important in human construct that on the other side of the story that there is actually pain. So I'm going to make all of you muted. You may select.
And then today with that trauma history and nervous system regulation.
All right, okay. All right, so you are starting to recognize it's part of human experience, and trauma is informing love rather than making you it's not something that necessarily viciously trying to break us down. It's part of human experience. It informs love. So now let's dive into the topic. Why trauma-informed coaching? Do you know, according to WHO estimates, around the world, about 70% of the people globally experience a potentially traumatic event in their lifetime. 70% of the people. That includes me, perhaps you, and your clients as well. They may appear they are healthy. They may appear they are in baseline mental, emotional state, but it's not guaranteed that they haven't experienced a traumatic event. And trauma is also elusive. Now, this 70% is not fully accurate. One of the reasons is that when a traumatic experience happens to us, sometimes when we can cope up with it, it is so overwhelming. When it is so overwhelming, there's a chance we go into one of these states out of many other possibility. Dissociation. We disassociate from that. We don't access it. We don't access the memory. Or we go into a state of paralysis. We call it somewhat freeze, if not further. Technically speaking, from a clinical perspective, we call it tonic immobility. It's a little bit different from freeze response, but that's the closest word that I could use. It's like the deer in the headlights. And also, part of this dissociation as well as tonic immobility, we also create a chronic amnesia. So these 30% who do not report the traumatic experience potentially could also be in that space. And that's why some of your clients have chronic problems sometimes, or sometimes they call it burnout, sometimes they call it procrastination, sometimes they just can't take actions. But they also do not remember having traumatic experiences. And another type of this 30% also may have difficulties and challenges, but they might not directly relate to a trauma experience because they might be like those Holocaust survivors or that cat. Perhaps their ancestors have had traumatic experiences that we don't even know why we behave in a specific way, why we have that specific trigger. It seems like I'm talking about this extremely challenging experiences. Not necessarily. Think about a simple situation. You go to the airline counter, you go to the customer care counter, and you would like something to happen according to what you believe is right. And unfortunately, the person at the officer or the service person at the counter cannot help you really. And sometimes you experience frustration. Sometimes you get agitated. Some of us can manage that, and some of us can't. Perhaps we lose our temper. Perhaps we say something strongly to that person. And later on, perhaps you boarded the flight, you're on the way. As you're on the way, you may regret that experience. You might say, why did I say that? That's not who I am in essence. That's not who I am in essence. Why is that? That is a trauma response triggered by this situation. And you know that service person really couldn't help you. It's not their fault the flight got delayed. It's not their fault the insurance claim was not possible. But we got somehow angry with that person. Sometimes we might also have lost it with this person. So we recognize that it's something that is deep rooted that showed up. So it doesn't necessarily need to be an assault. It doesn't necessarily need to be somewhat a war veteran experiencing post traumatic stress disorder. Even slight moments like that teach us there are deep rooted things in us that we might not necessarily know. It's part of survival. This unfairness that we experienced, we perceive as our survival being threat, although consciously, cognitively, in our thinking brain, we don't think like that. Seems like my slides are stuck a little bit. Please give me a second. Okay, let me reshare the slides. Bear with me. All right. So let's look at a little bit of an example. So like I said earlier, when you look at traditional coaching frameworks like ICF coaching framework, EMCC framework, you notice you operate within here and now to the present, present to the future, here and now to the future. But we do not regard for the client's past. This can be problematic. If you are the kind of coach who work with the client on the surface level, you recognize where client is now and quickly help them to set goals and move forward. Perhaps this approach could work. But if you're the kind of professional, if you're the kind of coach who would like to do deep work with the client, create deep transformation, this approach might not work. Perhaps we miss out a lot of things. And I must say this, that I strongly believe current traditional coaching frameworks have a big problem, which is that we are unaware about trauma. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we need to learn trauma in order to provide some kind of a therapy, psychotherapy, counseling, or some kind of a psychotherapeutic care. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when we are unaware of how to work with clients' past, challenges, difficulties, adversities, trauma, we could end up harming our client more than actually helping them. It's almost like we know that ocean can kill us if we do not how to engage in ocean, how to be in the ocean. We can easily die in the ocean. But it's a great resource. Just because there's a possibility of danger in the ocean doesn't mean that we explore that resource. And exploration doesn't mean that we use it to do something that is bad. So when we become aware of trauma, we know our boundaries better. That's what I mean here. You would know how to create self-care better. You would know when to stop. You would be able to help the client to acutely regulate. You would know when to challenge the client and when not to challenge the client. You would understand deep connection between you and the client, certain unconscious elements between you and the client. When you don't know, you simply don't know. So my suggestion to us as professional coaches is not about deviating or not wanting to know of something because it could potentially have a therapeutic implication. It's important that we know, therefore we know not to cross the boundary. Because when we don't know where the boundary is, we might cross it without knowing and we might bring harm to our clients. So let's look at an example. Coaching for procrastination or burnout. This is something that I see coaches undertake this very often. As an MCC, I do a lot of supervision and a lot of mentoring with colleagues those who are delivering real world, substantial amount of coaching. And very often I notice some of these coaches undertake procrastination and burnout as part of their delivery of coaching. And very often on the surface level, it seems like certain, certain beliefs, certain understanding that burnout procrastination might come from a place of weakness, laziness, inability to strategize, take actions, or not having accountability. Or is procrastination burnout truly a long-term survival state? What do I mean by that? Usually when we look at burnout, simple conditions like simple also is, in this moment, my judgment. It can be severe. There can be clinical burnout, clinical procrastination, for an example. But let's say the kind of clients that we as professional coaches work with. The underlying meaning could be fear of exposure, anticipated shame or criticism, perfectionism tied to safety of self-worth, loss of agency, earlier life experiences. And they can be linked to history of chronic stress, neglect, or threat. Now, this threat doesn't necessarily need to be someone tried to kill someone, try to assault someone. It can be as simple as very high expectations from parents, growing up in an environment where someone had to fight for their needs, to fulfill their basic needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of pyramid of needs, for an example. And perhaps the child did not receive safety, caring, nurturing as they grow up within the early stages of their life. Now that can become encoded in our body. This is called trauma encoding. And when that happens later on, we develop tendencies when there's a specific trigger is present in our life. Perhaps it's this new supervisor who triggers their unconscious body, unconscious nervous system, unconscious parts, maybe certain emotional parts of their brain, of their father, perhaps, of their mother. And when that person is present in that environment, perhaps they are not able to perform because of the feeling of shame and criticism. Perhaps they are not feeling safety, or perhaps they are not feeling their self-worth. So you're noticing now immediately when someone is procrastinating, someone is burnt out, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are at the moment overloaded with what is going on. That can be possible, that could be possible. Very minor cases of procrastination and burnt out. Come to think of it, you know, your client knows this is exactly what I should be doing. And this is also what I wouldn't be doing. And I strongly also believe that we as professional coaches also sometimes struggle with these elements. You wanted to create social media content, you wanted to come up with that specific article, you wanted to create this video, you wanted to reach out to that specific organization, but sometimes we do not reach out. And we are a professional coach. Why is that? We know how to set goals, we know how to create actions, we know how to provide accountability and move towards the solutions, outcomes, goals, and transformation. Yet we hold ourselves back. A form of procrastination, form of aspect of burnt out. So we are not invincible, frankly speaking, to the unconscious voices that are whispering in our ear, whether we like it or not. So what nervous system really is saying is not that I don't want to do this. While I have this task that I am so well trained. I went to university for 4 years. I did a master's for 3 years, and I'm trained to do this, and I'm really good at it. Yet I simply decide not to do that, or I simply dissociate from it. I end up watching some binge watching TV. We end up doom scrolling. When this happens, this indicates that it's really not about some Procrastination is just a word that actually whispers to us that this is somehow dangerous. Therefore, I dissociate from this danger. I cope up with danger by bringing my mind, my cognitive mind, somewhere else. But our body is feeling the danger. That's what it really is about. Not every case of procrastination, not every case of burnout. There may be some procrastination burnout that can be managed. I'm talking about the type of procrastination or the burnout where these individuals, even with deeper clarity, that they are unable to take actions. They don't know why they can't take actions. So when we look at traditional coaching, as I said, we focus on the present moment and then we guide the client towards future. We act as a catalyst for the client to find their own answers towards the future. Now, let's look at what really trauma is, the causes of trauma, before we really look at what trauma-informed coaching is. It's truly two things. One is too much, too fast, too soon. When something happens that is too much, overwhelmingly too much, it happened too fast and it happened too soon, before the right age. Perhaps during certain developmental age, we are not supposed to be exposed to certain things. It overwhelmed us. So type of trauma is overwhelming experiences. And I believe very often general public, when they think about trauma, they think about this overwhelming experience. Now, the truth is, that's not only trauma. Trauma also comes from a place of not having enough or having experiencing an adversity for too long. For an example, when the child is left with a nanny, when they did not receive nurturing care for over a long period of time, when you seek love as a child, when we grow up, when you seek love, your parents, for whatever the reasons, perhaps they were working abroad, perhaps they had busy lives, they did not intend to induce trauma on you. Perhaps you grew up with your grandmother and you might not have received the right caring, right nurturing longest time. Simply looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you come to think of, many of us have received the our physiological needs, and then psychological needs, safety needs, and then moving on, love and belonging needs, and then moving on, self-esteem needs, and then moving on, self-actualization needs. Now, there are certain cultures. The love language is criticism. Cognitively, one needs great deal of cognitive awareness. My mom criticized me, my dad criticized me, my school criticized me, because that's our love language, because that's our cultural construct. But your nervous system, your unconscious mind doesn't understand criticism from this cognitive thinking that it's love language. It understands, I did not receive love. I did not receive care, nurturing growing up. Now, that is not having received enough nurturing, caring for over a long period of time. So we grow up and we accept the reality. My culture is, my love language is criticism, and we continue to actually traumatize people in our life. And unfortunate enough that we traumatize the people that we love the most in our life. So trauma is both sides, both overwhelm and deprivation. And very often, deprivation is not something that ever gets discussed. So some examples of overwhelming traumatic experiences: a sudden car accident, physical or sexual violation, being placed in foster care, emotional being exposed to vulnerability without consent. It may be your client tells you a story about their childhood. Perhaps they were sexually abused, and that is trauma inducing to you. And many psychotherapists struggle with their own well being because they get constantly exposed with traumatic content. Sometimes even things like sudden success, visibility without preparation, like winning the lottery or going viral, can be traumatic if we didn't understand, if you couldn't process. Or simply something like relocation, especially as children, even for yourself as an adult, relocation can be traumatic. Not enough for too long. Very often, early life experience, emotional attunement, safety, love, validation, nourishment, protection. These are areas sometimes we do not receive. And our parents, unfortunately, are not aware that actually by not creating the right environment for you to grow, we are slowly, in long term, slowly, step by step, we are traumatizing our children. And that's why many of us grow up to be shameful, questioning our worthiness, and having identity fragmentations. I was just talking about this in a recent class. I'm not sure about you. If you're doing deep work with your clients, deep transformational work with your clients, how many clients of you may have said to you that they feel like a fraud? Perhaps how many of you might feel like a fraud, even though you have all the qualifications, even though you have all the credentials? Some of us feel like a fraud. In my case, 99% of the clients, some of them are multimillionaires. Some of them have a wonderful family. Some of them are educators. Some of them are senior executives. Some of them own businesses. Yet they say that they feel like a fraud. It's because there are certain fragmented parts of our identity that we are not recognizing have been affected by traumatic content context without our awareness. So we are starting to recognize trauma is not something that we run away from. Trauma is something that we need to open our door to. As you know the power of your clients looking deep within themselves, finding answers, we are also recognizing the importance of opening the doors and recognizing what might be certain elements of us that we are unaware that behave in a specific way, that we feel and think in a specific way. So, when it comes to trauma-informed coaching, how do I define trauma? I believe trauma is what happens when an experience or ongoing condition either overwhelms person's nervous system, leaving them unable to feel safe, supported, or regulated, and forcing the body and mind to adapt in ways that prioritize survival over growth, over flourishing. And the trauma-informed coaching competency framework that I'm about to introduce to you is focused on that. Now, when we look at the definition of trauma, as a psychotherapist, I must mention the definition that I should look at is the DSM-5 definition. If you're a psychotherapist, you know what DSM-5 means. The Diagnostics and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. And then the other definition we can look at is ICD, International Classification of Diseases. But I do not necessarily fully agree with these two definitions. The reason being, these two definitions come from a place of symptom management. So they talk about intense experiences, and in that equation, lots of true content goes missing. Why is that? It's very important for us to understand this. Remember earlier I mentioned to you that there are about 70% of the population perhaps have had traumatic experiences in their life. And in reality, it is much more than 70%. So the trauma responses, if not the outcomes of trauma, how trauma shows up when there is a trigger in our life, can be categorized into three main areas. One is called adaptive zone, which is temporary. That's why sometimes someone was in a collision, let's say an accident, one person become almost paralyzed. No physical injuries, but they can't even move. They have gone into a shock state. Perhaps they don't remember anything, an amnesia. But there's this other person who get up and just walk away. So you notice that depending on how vulnerable our nervous system, how we perceive the experience, we have different response. So we never really can say that this is a larger trauma than this is. This is more intense trauma than this. We do not have, we cannot classify trauma like that because it really depends on how intense the trauma really depends on how person experienced it, how their nervous system processed it. So in adaptive zone, it's a person who stood up and walked away from that experience and had no consequences. We call this temporary. So there may be temporary anxiety, certain sleep disturbances, emotional overwhelm for a short period of time, usually few days to a week. We call this adaptive zone. And individuals of this caliber may not require any trauma intervention because they're in the adaptive zone. And then on the other hand side, where a clinical intervention is required, where either a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a physician would need to work with the client when they're in the stage of impairment. And that's what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. Very often there are many stressor-related disorders. But if I simply mention the direct ones, for an example, depression, anxiety, ASD, acute stress disorder, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the most common one is, if you could think of it, is CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And very often we think this kind of stress disorders tend to be somewhat paralyzing, impairing in such ways. The truth is that they mostly affect our identity. Very often, professional coaches say, authentic self, become your authentic self. Well, in my opinion, authentic self is something that we curate. I do not believe that there's a single authentic self as such. What I believe in is that there's an evolving self, and this evolving self could be more aligned self to themselves. And perhaps this is what we call authentic self. Authentic self sounds like a permanent state or conclusive state. Therefore, I would like to say an evolving aligned self. The more we recognize what happened to us, what are the gaps in our personality, our identity, the more we are able to integrate ourselves. And perhaps that's what we call this authentic self. And that's where this feeling like a fraud comes from. And interestingly, most people are in this state, which we call subclinical trauma responses. If not, they do not qualify for a clinical diagnosis, but we end up calling loosely high functioning people, high functioning with challenges that they have. And many of us tend to be in this area. Very often we do not seek help because we do not feel that we are paralyzed or it's fully impairing us. Those individuals who are truly impaired, the ones who are seeking, are really in the clinical range. So let's understand a little bit, how is this working? I mentioned the word unconscious several times. Let's try to simply understand. Now, at the moment, I am doing a PhD in psychology, and the topic of psychology is addressing, the topic of my thesis is addressing childhood trauma. It's because I come from a very strong, adverse, poverty, and traumatic background. Now, please bear with me. Prepare your nervous system when I say this. My grandfather committed suicide when my mother was just 5 years old. And from a very comfortable life, my mother and other four siblings and my grandmother fell into destitution that day, even before my grandfather's body arrived at their home. So as a result, my grandmother, my mother, and all other siblings experienced atrocious traumatic experiences. They grew up in poverty, they grew up in a trauma-induced world. you're noticing that my English is not very seamless. It's because I'm from Sri Lanka. So please forgive me about my English, right? I hope I make sense. So imagine 60 years ago in Sri Lanka, someone growing up in such traumatic experiences. So my mother ended up having many difficult, challenging mental disorders. Now, as a psychologist, that I can make a diagnosis of. Well, of course, she has healed. She has gone through a healing journey, and with so much love, I have accompanied her through that journey. But if I track back, me and my sister, we grew up in an environment. One day we could see angel of a mother, and some days we just simply couldn't recognize our mother because she was so chaotic. And my father, my father's love of his life is my mother. It has always been, it is the case up until now. And my father, also coming from a family, being the youngest child, being neglected very strongly, he didn't know how to support my mother. He did not know how to hold my mother. And he did not know how to deal with his own inner world. Therefore, he started dissociating from our family. Therefore, we experienced the absence of our father. So, up until I started this deep healing process, understanding what trauma is, started doing postgraduate research, I did not know what was happening to me. So I have come a long way. And I have come to understand not just only from the textbooks, but also through my own life journey, looking at my grandmother, looking at my mother, father, and even the grandfather who committed suicide. I have come to learn when my mother, when we couldn't recognize chaotic mother, when we didn't know where our absent father was, what they were doing was coping, and it was unconscious. So if you look at this slide, the traumatic event, simple event, the child was attacked by a dog, perhaps not physical danger, and something happened to their brain, nervous system, even to their DNA. And then later on, when a, when the person has grown up to be an adult, when there's a pet dog, harmless, is present, they become they go into that same response as a child. Now, this adult would tell you that I shouldn't be afraid. There's no reason for me to be afraid. I know that this little dog is not harmful. Yet, when I see this dog, I go into this response of sometimes freezing. So we call it unconscious responses. Like that when the cat got ejected from its place, like the Holocaust survivors remained alert for a longer period of time. When my mom was chaotic, when my father was absent, it was, and also when you lost your temper at the service counter, it was unconscious. And that's why, while you were having that cup of coffee or while you were on that plane, you noticed that that's not me. What happened to me? And perhaps you regretted that. Because when there's a trigger in our environment, the trauma response that shows up is unconscious. It's not something that we think and do. Because in order to survive, we need to act quickly. There is no time for us to compassionately think about the trigger and then take actions. Perhaps then we are too late. So, our universal intelligence that governs our body, that governs our energy and our consciousness, decided this process, getting someone into safety process, should not be given cognitive control. Because if we do that, perhaps we have not survived. All that evolutionary line perhaps have not survived for us to be here to begin with today, to be discussing this to begin with. That's why it is unconscious, because it informs safety, it informs love, and it is human condition. Why? Because if there was no pain, if there was no danger, you might just walk outside of a or from a cliff. You will step out because we don't understand danger. Therefore, we cannot necessarily always expect to stay in that feeling of happiness, ecstasy, well-being all the time. What is important is recognizing human condition, that pain is necessary for pleasure. Pleasure is necessary for pain. I'm not talking about pleasure here, the pleasure that you gain out of eating sugar, pleasure that you gain out of having an orgasm. I'm talking about the kind of pleasure that you describe when you love your partner, when you love your sibling, when you love your child. That's pleasure. So, in order for us to experience humanness, experience this life, it's required to have both pain and pleasure. Therefore, trauma informs love. Trauma is not here to necessarily break us, although in certain conditions that it could truly break us to the extent that we might even die. That's the reality. And that's human condition. And that's what is granted the very moment we were conceived. In fact, not just the moment that we were conceived, even at times when our ancestors had challenges. But don't get me wrong, trauma is not always informing love in danger. Do you have a heart that you can immensely love? Do you have a drive that you can work smartly hard? Do you love helping people? Do you love make a difference? Do you love making impact and transforming people? Well, those are also outcomes of how your ancestors loved, how your ancestors accomplished, how your ancestors experienced joy, experienced pleasure, and experienced love. Therefore, all our experiences through the generations, your experiences bring us to a place of truly humanness. And this is human condition. Learning about trauma truly means learning about yourself so deeply, becoming so compassionate towards yourself, and not focusing on neither of the extremes, bringing yourself to the middle grounds. Being able to celebrate pleasure and being able to come to terms with pain, enabling endurance. And if I simply mentioned, there are 4 classic trauma responses. Like I said, you could do a PhD about trauma responses, or you can learn about trauma responses forever. We only have about 20 years of research into trauma. Therefore, our parents, if you felt any resentment towards your parents that they did not provide care, well, they didn't know, because trauma science didn't necessarily exist as such. Even the science that existed was not available to public. Therefore, simply looking at some trauma responses: fight response, anger, irritability, aggression, disappointment. So perhaps when your child is angry, there's aggression, it might not indicate that child needs to be corrected in that right moment. There may be something in the past that child is triggered with. And when people have anxiety, fear, panic, and when they over worry, it could be flight response. When they have freeze response, they become immobile very often. Immobilization is a different category, but here we put it under freeze for simple understanding. Disassociation, depression, isolation, compulsion. We self-harm sometimes. This is freeze response. And this, perhaps you heard fight, flight, freeze. Have you heard about fawn response? People-pleasing behavior, how we walk on eggshells. Perhaps you walk on eggshells around your partner. And if you come to think of it, you may recall your mother was walking on eggshells. Perhaps you were told to walk on eggshells. And when we have had such experiences, we grow up to be people-pleasing. Sometimes we can say no. I think I have seen, including professional coaches, psychotherapists, clinicians, NGO workers, leaders, that they go beyond themselves to help others. Simply speaking, there's that leader you have worked with as a coach. Oh, my team always make this mistake. And my team, they all have children. Therefore, I decided to work up until 2 a.m. and I got the job done. They gain a sense of satisfaction by saying, but when they are saying, what they are really saying is that they prioritize others beyond their well-being. So that kind of compassion, that kind of commitment is not healthy. It's a type of self-harming, and it could come from a place of trauma, unconscious trauma, especially. Although it seems like this noble work, it truly is a trauma response, especially if it is a recurring pattern. It could happen once, it could happen twice. But if that person's characteristic, identity itself is like that, then it could be something much more deeper. Perhaps that's the kind of person who feels like that they are a fraud. So, as I went through my own learning journey, my own healing journey, I started looking at learning more and more about trauma. As I did that, I noticed that there are few clinical frameworks, few for your surprise potentially, few clinical frameworks. They cannot be necessarily directly applied into coaching world. Very often we say that we intend to save the world. We intend to create a better world. And we intend to create a healed earth. And very often we also believe that this needs to be done by politicians, billionaires, or the leaders. I don't believe in that. I believe in personal power. Unless we all come together and do what is within our power, I believe there will not be a healed world. There would not be a safe world for our children. So what I do is, when I recognize that there's a gap somewhere, I step in and I do something about it. And that's my way of supporting our earth to heal, the beautiful blue planet that we live. So much suffering happening in the world. If you are simply aware of what is happening in the world through social media or the mainstream media, we know as we speak how many children are losing their limbs, legs, eyes, and parents, and the roof over their head and food for them to eat. So I am not ready to wait for the governments to take actions. I would do whatever I can do. And that's why I'm doing this session. So several years ago, I decided to undertake a postgraduate psychology related, applied psychology related degree. I decided I am going to focus on humanistic therapy, which is very similar to coaching, and create a comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency framework. And I call it CTICC framework. And I completed this last year, peer-reviewed, accepted, and very well received by my academic institution as I completed this framework. And what I did was, in order to create alignment with world's golden standard, I decided to align this comprehensive trauma-informed coaching competency framework with the ICF competency framework. As you're aware, I'm an MCC and we deliver ICF coach education. So I decided to integrate them directly with ICF competency framework. So if you look at the competence, just like the team coaching competency framework, it's nothing new to our world. So demonstrates ethical practice in trauma lens, demonstrates ethical practice as a trauma-informed reflective practitioner. And so there are 8 competency, now focusing on ICF current 8 competency. But there is one competency that cannot be fit in any of these 8 competency. So I decided to create a 9th competency, which is foundational knowledge of trauma and trauma-related disorders. It's not to treat. It is not to cross the boundary of coaching. It is to be aware what is the true boundary of coaching. Because when we don't know the boundary, imagine it's like an open field. We don't know where the line is. It is to help our clients. It is to refer our clients at the right time before we re-traumatize the client. I'll tell you in a minute what is re-traumatizing. Why trauma-informed coaching? Like I said, we cannot necessarily say that our practice is either integrative or holistic unless at least we are able to encompass the past. It's almost like when a tree, the trunk of the tree, and then the branches and the leaves have a problem, we think the problem should be somewhere in the trunk and the leaves and the branches. It's almost like forgetting the roots. We need to remember sometimes when the tree is dying out, it's not the branches that we need to water, it's the roots that we need to water. Therefore, if you truly want to create holistic, holistic transformation in your clients, you should find a framework that you can also incorporate clients past without deviating into a therapeutic mode. And that's why I mentioned trauma-related disorders knowledge. We know what are the symptoms so that we know the importance of referring the client to the right professional, in this case, a psychotherapist, a clinical psychologist, a physician, or a psychiatrist. That's why trauma-informed coaching. And the more you are aware of trauma, the more you are aware of what is happening in our brain, what is happening in our nervous system, we are able to potentially acutely regulate the client, help the client to receive the really, truly necessary support rather than perhaps deviating the client in a direction that we might end up hurting them. Most adults carry some level of unresolved trauma, whether we like it or not. We can deny all we want. That would also indicate that might mean dissociation. That might mean that we cannot remember, amnesia from trauma. Trauma shapes behavior before cognition. And that's what we call, the nature and the nurture, right? So the nature is the part of us that epigenetics, like the cat has no control over its ejection. The involuntary muscle reflex, cat absolutely has no control. Cat cannot think through and say, I am not going to get ejected next time. My peripheral vision detects the shape of a snake like a cucumber. The children of the Holocaust survivors cannot think their way out, literally think their way out. I do not want to be alert longer because my parents experienced Holocaust. There are ways that could be reprocessed, but you notice that it's a genetic expression. Therefore, cognition is only just survival part, just day-to-day survival part of who we are. Something I often say, if you are in my network, I often say that we are largely unconscious. We are largely unconscious. How we behave, how we speak, what we do is largely unconscious. Our cognition is just a very small part of who we are. It is to experience this beautiful blue planet that we are in. It is to process between what is safe for me and what is not at a cognitive level. It is to love. It is to bring ourselves to middle path. But trauma shapes behavior before our cognition. If you have a difficult child, if you have a difficult friend, it's like telling them, don't be negative, don't be difficult. That's easy said and done because it's not something that's done often consciously. I'm not saying because someone has had a traumatic experience that it is an excuse for them to go on to hurt others, to go on to be destructive. What is important is they become aware of that and do something about it. For an example, like taking trauma-informed coaching or reaching out to a medical professional, a clinician who can help them. Without trauma awareness, coaching can unintentionally traumatize. Since we still have a little bit more time, I would like to give you a very simple example. You have a client. We all have had this client. If you are an ACC, if not, if you're a PCC by now, you have had this client. It's impossible for you not to have had this client. This client comes to your sessions, deeply reflective, deeply intentional, comes up with wonderful, amazing outcomes. Post-session undertaking, great actions, set up accountability very well. Go home, come to the next session. The actions have not been taken. The accountability was lost. So you ask, how were the actions? Oh, I wasn't able to, and they give you excuses. This happened, that happened, I was busy, I couldn't do it. Then you ask, what should we do then? Should we address them? Or you want to go on to the topic today? Perhaps they say, I want to discuss this, why I didn't. So you discuss. Now they reiterate their actions, or they do another session, different topic, and they have actions. And you notice they come back again. Either actions they have not taken actions, or they have taken partial actions. They are not able to really remain accountable. They are not necessarily able to take post-session undertaking. Time to time, sometimes they also say that they feel sometimes indifferent, sometimes they feel challenged, sometimes they feel difficult, perhaps they feel sad. They also have that, perhaps those, if you are asking those questions. Perhaps you are not, because that sounds like you're primarily operating in clients' emotional past. Now, what would you do as a coach? I have literally listened to mentoring sessions, submitted sessions, supervisees. They say, so they took a strong approach. They challenged the client. They reduced the amount of, they helped the client to reduce the amount of actions. They created stronger accountability. Yet again, client keeps failing. Now, as I'm speaking, we all have had that client. That's what I said at the beginning. Now, let's look at the neuroscientific perspective, what is happening in this client. Perhaps this might not be just the only linear case. It can be many different stories, but let's think about a very straightforward one. When we grow up, grow up adolescents at any stage of our life, when we experience something either overwhelming or some kind of a deprivation over a long period of time, our brain, our nervous system creates neural networks, quite literally connected. Our brain, nervous system connect certain networks to process those experiences, to cope up with those experiences. And sometimes when we are in a moment of hypervigilance, if not when we feel threatened, those areas get activated. And if these systems remain activated over a long period of time, they could become hyperactive. And for an example, that could be anxiety. When people say, I have anxiety disorder, that truly means that there are certain hyperactive networks that are looping, and often they are not serving the client. They often feel painful. They often feel sad. They often feel upset. They feel anger. They feel frustration. Quite literally, symptoms of anxiety. They feel worried. They are afraid to talk to people. They are afraid to make a call. They're afraid to take that step. So when they have that, it could come from a place of potentially having too many perfectionist expectation as a child. Perhaps they walked on eggshells with their mother growing up. So that means it's affecting their identity, their autonomy. It's affecting how they perceive themselves. It's affecting their self-worth. Now you unintentionally become like that person who traumatized them, having these high expectations that you must finish this post-session undertaking, that I'm challenging you. Let's have heightened level of accountability. Let's have a detailed plan. You are activating, triggering client's trauma, which means we are making it worse for the client. you did not intend that, or not you, let's say another coach, someone who is completely unaware. Their intention was pure. Their intention was to help the client, but unintentionally, because they did not understand the neurobiology of this specific, what is happening to the client, they might end up, which we call re-traumatizing the client. When you re-traumatize a client, those networks are re-strengthened, restated. So we are slowly pushing the client towards more of depression, anxiety, or PTSD. Since you are not a clinician, since you do not know what inquiry to make in order to know whether the client is experiencing anxiety, depression, for an example, you do not know the diagnostic criteria of anxiety. You do not know the diagnostic criteria of depression or PTSD unless you are a clinician. We do not learn this in high school. Sometimes we learn it very abstractly or lightly in our bachelor's degree. And when we do a master's degree in applied psychology, that's when we really go deep into DSM-5 criteria or ICD-11 for that matter. Those are clinical documents. Therefore, you are not aware. Therefore, you slowly push the client in a direction that would do more harm to the client rather than serve the client. Therefore, the trauma awareness, without trauma awareness, coaching, if you're especially working with clients, those who would like to do deeper work within themselves, we could unintentionally harm the client. That means we are naturally violating an ethical boundary. If we are pushing the client towards harm without actually taking actions for harm reduction, that means we are harming another human being psychologically, emotionally, and that also could be physiological, because now we know trauma is not just a matter of mental, emotional, it's physiological. There are certain tissues in our body, our neural networks, which is physiological, which is neurological, hold onto trauma, the trauma which we call trauma encoding. So that gives you the opportunity to collaborate with clinicians. It doesn't mean that you have to say no to the client. Perhaps you can collaborate with a clinician. And I also find it a little bit strange how many of us work as coaches. Imagine when a patient arrives at the hospital. Perhaps they have a specific condition. They might need a radiologist. They would need a nurse. They need a doctor. They might need a specialist. And you notice that these specialists work within an ecosystem to support the client. For an example, if there's a surgery, not one doctor could do everything. There needs to be anesthesian, there need to be surgical nurses, there need to be a surgeon, there need to be other doctors, and so on. Very often when we provide human care to people where we work, especially in clinical environments, we work as ecosystems. And that could happen, that should happen in coaching world as well. Therefore, you can collaborate with other clinicians to provide the right care. Perhaps the clinician advises you, all right, within these boundaries, you can help the client with coaching. I will take care of this part. Trauma-informed coaching is integrative of past without crossing the boundaries of psychotherapy. I think this is very clear. I have been talking about it. Very often, coaching themes are trauma adjacent. Even ICF competency framework tell you observe client's body language, observe client's tonality, observe client's energetic perception, observe client's emotions, inquire about client's emotions. So ICF is inviting us to, although it's here and now to the future, ICF is inviting us to address these things with, if there's an emotional component, especially if there's an intense, difficult emotion that could stem from a traumatic experience. Therefore, the moment you address challenging experiences for clients, except it is acute situation, it could mean that what you're discussing with the client is trauma adjacent. So it changes the narrative. Right now, in the coaching world, the narrative is goal achievement, reflection, and goal orientation. And to the extent sometimes we harm our client. I believe when it comes to broader trauma-aware, trauma-informed coaching frameworks, actual outcome of coaching could be understanding and acceptance just beyond goal. And in fact, ICF is right about it because in ICF coaching, when you set a goal, there is no expectation for the goal to be achieved. The expectation is the client's autonomy to grow. And that's what we call coach the person. When you coach the person, we are not attached to a goal. What we are truly trying to do is grow client's autonomy. Therefore, in order for us to work with client autonomy, we cannot just only work with here and now to the future. Autonomy is constructed. Right now, your autonomy is constructed based on your past. From the moment you were conceived, what genetics were merged based on what ancestral experiences were merged together through the DNA your parents gave to you. And from that moment, your mom's experiences while you were in her womb, and how your dad caregave to your mom, to you, and then how you were born and being told you are this religion, you are this nationality, you need to behave this way, you need to wear this, you should not wear this, you can eat this, you can't eat this. Your autonomy was created by all these implications, all these associations forced upon you. And that's why very often we do not feel authentic, or we feel like a fraud. Therefore, sometimes in coaching, what is required is understanding and acceptance in order to grow autonomy, not just goal achievement, taking actions, having accountability. Because when we are trauma informed, we have the nervous system literacy. We understand neuroscience. We understand psychology enough for us to work with clients. Doesn't need to be psychoeducation. It doesn't need to be therapy. Perhaps psychoeducation can be done by someone qualified, like a psychologist, a counselor. I strongly believe this is the future. I strongly believe in 10 years' time, perhaps I would sound very obnoxious when I say this, people will know my name. Because I strongly believe that how the world is becoming more and more aware, there's enough and more research that we as coaches will be challenged in the future ethically, morally, professionally, spiritually, that when we work with clients, that we must be responsible. So I do not believe trauma-informed coaching is a specialization. I believe trauma-informed coaching is the foundation of any coaching, any human care, because then we meet those broken, wounded places, not just the troubled person, not just the goal, not just the struggle. It's important that we meet the human, we meet those broken places. And that's why I said at the beginning, if you find it difficult to experience deep emotion from your clients, difficult for you to become vulnerable, I believe we need to first meet those broken parts within ourselves. And I believe with this, we understand that trauma truly informs love. I believe we truly understand trauma is part of human condition, human experience. Without it, there is no evolutionary process. Without it, you and I are not going to be here. So I am doing a complimentary lecture series. I have been doing this for 4 months now, and there are other 8 sessions to go. And this is, in fact, slightly similar to the very first session I did. Absolutely complimentary. It's available through our e-learning platform called Awaken Mind Guide. So if you allow me, I will send you an invitation for you to join this complimentary 12 series. If you feel an alignment, a call-in, you're very welcome to join. And in next session, I will be discussing about how trauma imprinting happens. I think it's going to happen on the 8th of June, from 8th of June. So you can catch up with the sessions, recorded sessions in the e-learning platform, which you have access to on complimentary basis. And you also receive a certification at the end of the process absolutely free of charge. The reason why I do that complimentary is because I strongly believe that this message need to be shared. So if you believe that if you are not aligned, if you do not want to join, it's all right. Share with someone who might receive value from it. Or if you align, bring your community, bring your tribe into this experience. And I am not going to promote any programs. I'm not going to recommend our programs to you. Needless to say, we do have the trauma-informed advanced practitioner program that I deliver from the deepest place of my heart. It's an ICF level 2 and level 3 program. You know where to find me. You know my website. You're very welcome to come and have a look if you would like to. We are starting a cohort very soon in 27th of May, and it's exceeded the registrations. And we were forced to start another program in August, and I believe right now there's a waiting list for that program. And that's all the capacity I have at the moment, and I'm hoping to execute some in the next year in 2027. So with that, thank you so very much for being with me, sharing this space. And I hope my colleague, please share the registration for the CCE link. Once again, I wish you all a wonderful International Coaching Week. I hope today I was able to create value for the trust you placed in me and spend this time with me. I send you my best regards to you, and I hope you will become part of the Ignite Professional Network so that we can continue to inspire each other. With that, I would like to say goodbye. Happy International Coaching Week. Bye for now, colleagues. Thank you for your presence.